The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pristine windows of Sweetland Bakery, one of downtown's most exclusive pastry shops. Behind gleaming glass cases, rows of elaborate cakes stood like edible sculptures, each price tag a small fortune. The polished marble floors reflected the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, and the air carried the intoxicating scent of vanilla and fresh cream. This was where the city's elite came to celebrate their most precious moments. David Matthews pushed through the heavy glass door, his worn work boots silent against the expensive flooring. His faded denim jacket, patched at the elbows, seemed out of place among the boutique's sophisticated ambiance. In his calloused hands, he clutched a crumpled piece of paper with his daughter's carefully written birthday wish list. At the top, in her innocent 8-year-old handwriting, were the words strawberry cake with pink flowers. David had been working double shifts at the construction site for 3 weeks, saving every spare dollar for this moment. His daughter Emma had never asked for much. She understood, in the way children sometimes do, that money was tight since her mother had left them 2 years ago. But for her 9th birthday, David was determined to give her something special. Something that would make her feel as precious as she truly was. Across town in a glass tower that pierced the city skyline, Victoria Sterling sat in her corner office, reviewing quarterly reports. As CEO of Sterling Enterprises, she commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Her reputation preceded her everywhere she went. Ruthless in negotiations, brilliant in strategy, and completely uncompromising when it came to business. At 42, she had built an empire from nothing, transforming a small investment firm into a multinational corporation worth billions. Victoria's personal life was as carefully curated as her professional image. No husband, no children, no distractions. She lived in a penthouse apartment overlooking the harbor, drove a car worth more than most people's homes, and wore suits that cost more than David's monthly salary. She had earned every luxury through sheer determination and an almost supernatural ability to spot weakness in others. The bakery held different meanings for different people. For Victoria, it was a convenient stop for corporate gifts and client appreciations. For David, it represented a dream he wasn't sure he could afford. The distance between their worlds was measured not just in dollars, but in the fundamental assumptions they made about what was possible in life. David approached the counter where a perfectly groomed saleswoman stood arranging ribbon samples. Her name tag read Margaret, and her smile was as polished as the bakery's reputation. She looked up from her work, her expression shifting subtly as she took in David's appearance. Her eyes moved from his work-stained jacket to his anxious expression, making quick calculations about his purchasing power. "Can I help you?" Margaret asked, her tone professionally pleasant but noticeably cooler than it had been with the previous customer, a woman in designer clothing who had just ordered a $300 anniversary cake. David cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look. "Yes, I called yesterday about a birthday cake for my daughter. The name is Matthews." His voice carried the careful pronunciation of someone who had practiced this conversation in his head multiple times. Margaret consulted her appointment book with deliberate slowness. "Ah yes, the strawberry cake with pink buttercream flowers. 9-inch round. Let me just pull up the details." She moved to her computer terminal, her manicured fingers clicking across the keys with practiced efficiency. "The total comes to $247, Margaret announced, not looking up from her screen. "We'll need payment in full before we begin preparation." David felt his stomach drop. When he had called to inquire about prices, the voice on the phone had quoted $160. Either there had been a misunderstanding, or additional costs had been quietly added. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his worn leather wallet, counting the bills inside with growing dread. $137. It was every spare penny he had managed to save. Every tip from grateful homeowners. Every dollar he had chosen not to spend on his own lunch. It wasn't enough. Not even close. "Is there perhaps a smaller size?" David asked quietly, his voice barely audible above the bakery's soft background music. "Or maybe something simpler." Margaret's expression remained neutral, but something shifted in her posture. "Our smallest custom cake is the 6-inch, which runs $185. If you're looking for something more economical, we do have some pre-made items in our day-old section." The words hung in the air like a judgment. Around them, other customers continued their conversations about elaborate celebrations and expensive indulgences. David felt the weight of their occasional glances, the subtle way conversations paused when people noticed his internal struggle. He thought about Emma, who had been counting down the days to her birthday with the pure excitement only children possess. She had drawn pictures of her dream cake, complete with pink flowers and rainbow sprinkles. She had told her friends at school that her daddy was getting her the most beautiful cake in the whole city. The trust in her eyes when she looked at him was both his greatest treasure and his heaviest burden. "I'm sorry," David said finally, his voice thick with emotion he was trying to suppress. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about the price. I'll need to cancel the order." Margaret nodded efficiently and began closing the file on her computer. "No problem at all. These things happen." Her tone suggested this scenario was neither uncommon nor particularly noteworthy to her. As David turned to leave, he felt the eyes of other customers upon him. Some looked away quickly, embarrassed to witness someone else's financial limitations. Others stared more openly, their expressions ranging from pity to barely concealed disdain. He had become an uncomfortable reminder of the economic realities that existed just outside their protected world of luxury and privilege. In the corner booth, Victoria Sterling sat with her laptop open, ostensibly reviewing contracts while she waited for a business associate. She had chosen this location for their meeting precisely because it was quiet and discreet, far removed from the corporate environments where every conversation was analyzed and reported. She had been only half aware of the interaction at the counter until the man's voice caught her attention. Something in his tone, the careful dignity with which he spoke despite his obvious distress, made her look up from her work. She watched as he counted his money, saw the exact moment when reality crashed into hope. She observed the saleswoman's practiced indifference, and the other customers' reactions ranging from sympathy to judgment. Victoria had built her career on reading people, on understanding the dynamics of power and vulnerability. What she saw playing out at the bakery counter was a familiar story, told in a different context. She recognized the man's struggle not because she had experienced poverty recently, but because she remembered what it felt like to be powerless. To want something desperately and be told, in 1,000 subtle ways, that it wasn't meant for people like you. The man gathered his dignity around him like armor and walked toward the exit. His shoulders were straight, his pace steady, but Victoria could see the defeat in the careful way he moved. She had seen that same walk before, in mirrors and in memories she usually kept locked away. Without fully understanding why, Victoria closed her laptop and stood up. Her business associate could wait. Some moments demanded action, and this was one of them. "Excuse me," Victoria called out, her voice carrying the authority that came from years of commanding boardrooms. The entire bakery seemed to pause, conversations faltering as heads turned to identify the source of such confident interruption. David stopped near the door, turning slowly to face this unexpected voice. When he saw Victoria approaching, his first instinct was confusion. She clearly belonged in this world of expensive cakes and casual luxury. Her suit probably cost more than he made in a month, and she moved with the unmistakable confidence of someone accustomed to getting whatever she wanted. "I couldn't help but overhear," Victoria said, her voice softer now but still carrying that underlying steel. "You were ordering a birthday cake for your daughter?" David nodded cautiously, unsure where this conversation was heading. "Yes, but there's been a misunderstanding about the pricing." "It's no big deal." Victoria studied his face, seeing the pride that made him minimize his disappointment. The protective instinct that made him want to shield his daughter's dreams even when they were crumbling. She had spent decades learning to read people's motivations, their fears and desires. This man's motivation was crystal clear. He would do anything for his child, even if it meant swallowing his own dreams. "What's your daughter's name?" Victoria asked, ignoring Margaret's hovering presence and the increasingly curious stares from other customers. "Emma," David replied, his voice warming automatically at the mention of his child. "She turns 9 tomorrow." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, then turned to address Margaret directly. "I'd like to place an order. Your largest strawberry cake with pink buttercream flowers. Make it big enough for a real celebration. And I want 'Happy Birthday Emma' written in the most beautiful script you have." The bakery fell silent, except for the soft classical music playing overhead. Margaret's eyes widened slightly as she processed the request. This was the kind of order that made her day, the kind that resulted in impressive commissions and satisfied corporate customers. "Certainly," Margaret replied. Her demeanor transformed instantly. "Our premium celebration cake runs $450. When would you need it ready?" "Tomorrow morning. Early." Victoria reached into her purse and withdrew a credit card without hesitation. "And I want you to add some birthday decorations. Balloons, party hats, whatever makes a 9-year-old girl feel special." David stepped forward, his face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and something approaching anger. "Ma'am, I appreciate the gesture, but I can't accept charity. My daughter and we're doing just fine." Victoria met his eyes directly, recognizing the fierce pride that made him want to refuse help even when it was desperately needed. She had felt that same pride once, had understood the complicated shame that comes with needing things you cannot provide for yourself. "This isn't charity," Victoria said quietly, her voice carrying a weight of memory that surprised even her. This is one person who remembers what it feels like to wish for something impossible, helping ensure that another person doesn't have to experience that particular disappointment. The simple honesty of her statement seemed to cut through David's defenses. He looked at her more carefully, trying to understand what could motivate a stranger to such unexpected generosity. What he saw in her eyes wasn't pity or condescension, but something that looked almost like recognition. "I don't understand," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you do this for someone you don't even know?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, aware that everyone in the bakery was hanging on her words. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of carefully guarded memories she rarely shared with anyone. "When I was 8 years old, I spent my birthday alone in a foster home," she said, her usual corporate composure giving way to something more vulnerable. "The family I was staying with forgot it was my birthday entirely. I sat by the window all day, watching other children play outside, wondering if anyone in the world cared that I existed." The bakery remained silent, customers frozen by the unexpected intimacy of this revelation. Margaret had stopped pretending to work, her attention completely captured by this glimpse into the private pain of someone she had assumed lived a charmed life. "I promised myself that if I ever had the power to prevent a child from feeling that invisible, I would do it," Victoria continued. "Tomorrow is Emma's birthday. She should have a cake that makes her feel like the most important person in the world, because for 9 years, she has been exactly that to you." David felt his throat tighten with emotion he couldn't quite name. This woman, this stranger, with her expensive clothes and commanding presence, had somehow understood something essential about his relationship with his daughter. She had seen past his embarrassment to the love that drove him to want impossible things. "I don't know how to thank you," David said finally, his voice thick with gratitude and disbelief. "Don't thank me yet," Victoria replied, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Wait until you see Emma's face when she sees that cake." Margaret processed the payment with unusual efficiency, perhaps sensing that this transaction was about more than business. She assured Victoria that the cake would be spectacular, that Emma would have a birthday worthy of a princess. The other customers began to return to their conversations, but the energy in the bakery had shifted. Something profound had just occurred, a moment of unexpected grace that would be remembered and retold. As David prepared to leave, Victoria handed him her business card. "My number is on there. Call me tomorrow and let me know how the party goes." David studied the card, reading the name Victoria Sterling and recognizing it from newspaper headlines and business journals. He was holding the contact information of one of the city's most powerful executives, a woman whose decisions affected thousands of jobs and millions of dollars. Yet in this moment, she was simply someone who had remembered what it felt like to be forgotten. "I will," David promised, slipping the card carefully into his wallet. "And Miss Sterling? Emma's going to love this cake more than you can imagine." Victoria watched him leave, noting the different way he carried himself now. His shoulders were straighter, his steps more confident. He was still the same man who had walked in 30 minutes earlier, but something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer someone seeking charity, but rather someone whose worth had been recognized and honored. The next morning, Victoria found herself doing something she hadn't done in years, rearranging her schedule for personal reasons. She called her assistant and moved 2 meetings, claiming an urgent matter required her attention. It wasn't entirely untrue. Something about David and Emma's story had awakened feelings she thought she had successfully buried under decades of professional achievement. She arrived at Sweetland Bakery just as they were loading Emma's cake into a special transport box. It was a masterpiece of sugar artistry, 3 layers of strawberry cake covered in pale pink buttercream, decorated with hand-piped roses and delicate silver pearls. "Happy Birthday, Emma" was written in elegant script across the top, and the entire creation was surrounded by a garden of buttercream flowers in shades of pink and white. Victoria arranged for the cake to be delivered to David's apartment, along with a collection of party supplies she had purchased that morning. Balloons, streamers, party hats, and a selection of gifts chosen with care. Art supplies for a creative 9-year-old, books about brave girls and amazing adventures, and a small jewelry box with a ballerina that spun to gentle music. David's apartment building was in a part of town Victoria rarely visited, where the American dream felt more like an uphill battle than an inevitable destination. The building was old but clean, maintained by residents who took pride in their homes despite limited resources. She climbed 3 flights of stairs, carrying gifts and followed by the bakery delivery team. When David opened the door, his surprise was evident. He had expected a delivery, not a personal visit from the woman who had made it possible. Behind him, Victoria could see Emma getting ready for school, her hair in neat braids, her face bright with excitement about her upcoming birthday. "Miss Sterling," David said, stepping aside to welcome her in. I didn't expect you to come personally. I wanted to meet the birthday girl, Victoria replied, suddenly feeling oddly nervous. It had been years since she had interacted with children, and she wasn't sure she remembered how to speak to someone Emma's age. Emma appeared in the doorway to the living room, her eyes wide with curiosity about the elegant stranger in their apartment. She had inherited her father's kind eyes and her mother's delicate features, but there was something uniquely her own in the way she carried herself, a quiet confidence mixed with genuine warmth. "Emma, this is Miss Sterling," David said gently. "She's the one who made sure you'll have a very special birthday cake today." Emma studied Victoria with the frank assessment children use when meeting new adults. What she saw must have passed some internal test, because her face broke into a smile that transformed her entire appearance. "Thank you for my cake," Emma said politely, her voice carrying the careful pronunciation of a child who had been taught good manners. "Daddy says it's going to be the most beautiful cake anyone has ever seen." Victoria felt something shift inside her chest, a warming sensation she couldn't quite identify. When was the last time someone had thanked her with such genuine appreciation? In her business world, gratitude was often calculated, strategic, or entirely absent. Emma's simple sincerity was both refreshing and somehow painful. "I hope you like strawberry," Victoria said, crouching down to Emma's eye level. "Your father told me it was your favorite." "It is," Emma confirmed enthusiastically. "My grandma used to make strawberry jam when I was little, before she went to heaven. Daddy says strawberry things help me remember how sweet she was." The innocent reference to loss hit Victoria unexpectedly. This child, who should be thinking only of birthday wishes and party games, already understood that life contained both sweetness and sorrow. Yet there was no sadness in her voice when she mentioned her grandmother, only warm memory and acceptance. David began setting up the party decorations with Emma's help, transforming their modest living room into a celebration space. Victoria found herself drawn into the process, helping arrange balloons and laying out party supplies. It was strange how quickly the corporate executive became simply another adult preparing for a child's birthday. As the morning progressed, neighbors began arriving for Emma's party. Mrs. Patterson from next door brought homemade cookies. The Johnson family from downstairs contributed soda and chips. Old Mr. Martinez, who lived alone at the end of the hall, appeared with a hand-carved wooden bird he had made for Emma. These were people who didn't have much money, but they understood the importance of showing up for each other. Victoria observed these interactions with growing fascination. In her world, relationships were often transactional, based on mutual benefit and careful calculation of advantage. Here, she witnessed something simpler, and perhaps more valuable. People who cared about each other simply because they shared the common experience of making lives work despite limited resources. When the moment came to present the cake, the small gathering fell silent. Victoria watched Emma's face as David carried the magnificent creation from the kitchen, her expression cycling through disbelief, joy, and something approaching awe. For a 9-year-old, who had learned not to expect too much from life, this level of celebration was almost overwhelming. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen," Emma whispered, her eyes bright with unshed tears of happiness. "It looks like something from a fairy tale." Victoria felt her own eyes burning with unexpected emotion. When had she last witnessed such pure, uncomplicated joy? In her penthouse apartment, surrounded by expensive art and luxury furnishings, she rarely experienced the kind of genuine happiness that was radiating from this child. As Emma blew out her 9 candles, the room filled with cheers and applause from her small but devoted audience. She closed her eyes tightly, making a wish with the serious concentration children bring to important magic. When she opened them, her gaze found Victoria across the room. "I wish that everyone in the world could have someone who cares about them as much as my daddy cares about me," Emma announced. "And I wish that nice people like you would always have good things happen to them too." The simplicity of the wish, its complete absence of self-interest, struck Victoria like a physical blow. This child, who had every reason to wish for material things she lacked, had instead wished for universal love and kindness. It was a perspective that challenged everything Victoria thought she understood about human nature and desire. David's pride in his daughter was evident in every gesture, every protective glance, every gentle correction of her table manners. Victoria found herself envying not his poverty, which she wouldn't romanticize, but his clarity of purpose. Every decision he made was filtered through one simple question: what was best for Emma? It was a kind of moral certainty that Victoria's complex business life rarely allowed. As the party wound down and neighbors returned to their own lives, Victoria prepared to leave. She had stayed much longer than she had planned, drawn in by the warmth of this small celebration. Emma approached her with something in her hand, a drawing she had made during the party. "I drew this for you," Emma said, offering a paper covered in crayon drawings of stick figures holding hands around a birthday cake. "That's you, and that's me and Daddy. I wanted you to remember my party." Victoria accepted the drawing, with more ceremony than she would have accorded a $1 million contract. In Emma's artistic interpretation, all three figures were smiling broadly, standing together as if they belonged in each other's lives. It was a child's vision of how the world could work, simply, kindly, with room for everyone at the celebration. "I'll treasure this," Victoria said, and meant it more completely than she had meant anything in recent memory. "Thank you for letting me be part of your special day." As Victoria drove back to her own world of board meetings and profit margins, she carried with her the memory of Emma's joy and David's quiet dignity. The drawing sat on her passenger seat, a bright splash of crayon color against the leather interior of her luxury car. She had entered their lives as a stranger offering help, but she was leaving as someone who had received far more than she had given. The story could have ended there, with the successful birthday party and the warm glow of unexpected human connection. But in the age of information, few acts of kindness remain private for long. Someone at the bakery had recognized Victoria, had understood the significance of one of the city's most powerful executives personally arranging a birthday cake for a construction worker's daughter. Within days, the local news picked up the story. "Corporate CEO's random act of kindness touches city's heart," read the headline in the morning paper. The article portrayed Victoria as a benevolent figure, using her wealth and influence to help ordinary families. It was exactly the kind of positive publicity that corporations paid millions to achieve, but the attention brought complications neither Victoria nor David had anticipated. Reporters began calling David's workplace, asking neighbors about the family, requesting interviews about the inspiring encounter. Emma's school friends started treating her differently, as if her brief moment of local fame had somehow changed her fundamental nature. David found himself uncomfortable with the sudden scrutiny. He had accepted Victoria's help because it was offered with genuine kindness, not because he wanted to become a symbol of worthy poverty. The news coverage, while positive, made him feel exposed and somehow diminished. He was no longer simply a father who loved his daughter, but a struggling single parent who needed rescue from wealthy benefactors. Victoria's office began receiving calls from other news outlets, requests for interviews about her philanthropic philosophy, and invitations to charity events where her presence would attract donors. Her corporate communications team saw opportunity in the positive coverage, suggesting ways to leverage the story for broader public relations benefits. Both Victoria and David began to understand that their simple human interaction had been transformed into something larger and more complicated than either had intended. The genuine emotion of Emma's birthday party was being repackaged as inspiration content, their private moment of connection turned into public spectacle. Victoria made a decision that surprised her own staff and demonstrated the depth of change that one 9-year-old's birthday party had created in her perspective. She called a press conference, not to capitalize on the positive coverage, but to address the way the story was being told. Standing before a room full of reporters and cameras, Victoria looked directly into the lens and spoke with the same authority she brought to corporate announcements, but with a warmth that was entirely new to her public persona. "I want to address the recent news coverage about my interaction with the Matthews family," she began, her voice carrying across the packed conference room. "The story has been presented as an act of charity, with me as the benefactor and them as the recipients. That characterization misses the most important part of what actually happened." The room was silent, except for the soft clicking of camera shutters. Victoria rarely gave personal interviews, and never about emotional topics. This was unprecedented territory for the business media that usually covered her professional decisions. "When I met David Matthews and learned about his daughter Emma, I wasn't performing an act of charity," Victoria continued. "I was remembering what it feels like to be a child, whose happiness depends on adults who care enough to try. David didn't need my help to be a good father. Emma didn't need my intervention to deserve a beautiful birthday. They simply needed recognition that their love for each other was worth celebrating." Victoria paused, allowing her words to settle before continuing with what she knew would be the most important part of her statement. "The truth is, I received far more from them than I gave. Emma reminded me that joy doesn't require wealth, that genuine happiness comes from being seen and valued by people who matter to you. David showed me that dignity isn't about having enough money, but about how you choose to love the people in your care. They gave me the gift of remembering what it means to be part of a human community, rather than simply a business transaction." In the back of the room, David stood with Emma, who had insisted on attending once she learned there would be cameras. Victoria hadn't known they would be there, hadn't scripted this moment for maximum emotional impact. When she saw them, her carefully prepared remarks gave way to something more spontaneous and true. "David, Emma, thank you for letting me be part of your family's celebration," Victoria said. speaking directly to them despite the presence of dozens of reporters. You taught me that the most valuable investments aren't measured in dollars, but in the moments when we choose to see each other's worth. Emma stepped forward with the confidence of a child who had been raised to believe her voice mattered. The microphones amplified her clear, young voice as she addressed the room full of adults. Miss Sterling isn't different from anyone else, Emma announced, her words carrying the simple wisdom children sometimes possess. She just remembered that being nice to people makes everyone feel better. That's not special because she has money. That's special because she has a good heart. The conference room erupted in applause, but Victoria only heard Emma's words echoing in her mind. A 9-year-old had just articulated what years of business school and corporate training had somehow failed to teach her. That true success was measured by your capacity to recognize and nurture the good in others. As the press conference ended and reporters rushed to file their stories, Victoria found herself walking out with David and Emma, the three of them moving together toward the elevator as if this was how they had always intended to leave. What happens now? David asked quietly, as they waited for the elevator to arrive. Now Emma finishes 3rd grade, you keep building houses, and I try to remember what you both taught me about what really matters, Victoria replied. And maybe, if you'd like, we have dinner sometime. As friends. Emma looked up at both adults, with the serious expression she wore when making important decisions. I think that would be nice, she said finally. Friends should spend time together, and you're definitely our friend now. 6 months later, Victoria's assistant had learned to block time in her schedule for what she privately called Emma appointments. Birthday parties, school plays, soccer games, and quiet dinners in David's apartment had become regular features of Victoria's life. She had discovered that watching a child grow and learn was more engaging than most board meetings, and that David's perspective on work-life balance had fundamentally challenged her assumptions about success. Victoria's business hadn't suffered from her adjusted priorities. If anything, her decision-making had improved. She found herself asking different questions during negotiations. Not just what was profitable, but what was sustainable and humane. Her employees noticed that she seemed more present during meetings, more interested in their ideas and concerns. Stock analysts noted that Sterling Enterprises was performing better than ever, though they couldn't quite identify what had changed in the company's leadership approach. David had been promoted to crew supervisor at his construction company, partly because his work had always been excellent, but partly because his confidence had grown in ways that made him a natural leader. The man who had once apologized for taking up space now spoke up in meetings, offered suggestions for improving safety protocols, and mentored younger workers who reminded him of his earlier, more uncertain self. Emma continued to be the bright, thoughtful child she had always been, but now with an expanded understanding of how friendship could work across different worlds. She wrote thank you notes to Victoria after every shared experience, not because her father required it, but because she had learned that expressing gratitude was one of the ways people maintained connection across time and distance. On Emma's 10th birthday, the celebration was held in Victoria's penthouse apartment, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The guest list included Emma's school friends, David's co-workers, Victoria's assistant and her family, and several neighbors from David's building. It was an unlikely mixture of people who might never have met without Emma's birthday as the connecting point. The cake, once again from Sweetland Bakery, was even more elaborate than the previous year. But what Emma remembered most about that party wasn't the expensive decorations or the impressive view from Victoria's apartment. It was the moment when Victoria and her father were laughing together about something that had happened at Emma's school, the easy way they had learned to be friends, the comfortable certainty that all three of them belonged in each other's lives. As Emma blew out her 10 candles, she made the same wish she had made the year before. That everyone could have someone who cared about them. But this year, she added a silent prayer of gratitude for the strange way life sometimes worked, bringing together people who needed each other without even knowing it. Victoria watched Emma's face in the glow of the birthday candles, and realized that her own wish had evolved over the past year. She no longer wished to erase her childhood loneliness, because she understood now that those early experiences had prepared her to recognize and value genuine connection when it finally appeared. Instead, she wished for the wisdom to continue choosing relationships over transactions, moments over achievements, and love over the comfortable isolation that success so often provided. The story of the CEO and the birthday cake had become something larger than any of them had anticipated. It wasn't about wealth bridging, economic divides, or charity solving systemic problems. It was about the radical possibility that people could choose to see each other as fully human, could decide that someone else's joy was worth protecting, could build real friendship across the artificial boundaries that society created to keep people apart. Years later, when Emma graduated from high school as valedictorian, both David and Victoria sat in the front row of the auditorium, cheering with the pride of people who had been privileged to witness someone extraordinary grow into themselves. Emma's speech that day was about the unexpected ways life connects people, about how kindness multiplies when it's offered without expectation of return, and about the responsibility that comes with being loved well by people who believe in your potential. In the audience, Victoria thought about the woman she had been before that afternoon in the bakery, driven and successful, but somehow disconnected from the sources of meaning that made success worthwhile. David thought about the man he had been, loving his daughter fiercely but doubting his ability to give her everything she deserved. Both realized that their friendship had taught them that they had been asking the wrong questions about what constituted a life well lived. Emma's graduation speech concluded with words that would be quoted in the local paper and remembered by everyone who heard them that day. The best gifts aren't things we can buy, or achievements we can earn. They're the moments when someone chooses to see us, to believe in us, and to celebrate who we are. My father taught me that love means never giving up on someone, even when resources are limited. My friend Victoria taught me that true wealth is measured by how much joy you can create for other people. Together, they taught me that the most important question isn't what we can get from life, but what we can give to the people who matter to us. As the ceremony ended and families began their celebrations, Victoria, David, and Emma walked out together into the late spring sunshine. They were no longer the desperate father, the powerful executive, and the hopeful child who had met in a bakery 3 years earlier. They had become something simpler and more complex. A family created by choice, sustained by genuine affection, and strengthened by the understanding that some of life's most valuable gifts come from the most unexpected sources. The story that had begun with a canceled birthday cake had become a testament to the possibility that people could choose to care for each other across every boundary that usually kept them apart. It was proof that kindness was not a luxury for people who could afford it, but a necessity for anyone who wanted to live a fully human life. Most importantly, it was evidence that sometimes, when we stop long enough to really see each other, we discover that the help we offer others is also the healing we needed ourselves.